The truth is, the question of whether I would come to this Beit Midrash to speak today is not really the question in terms of the nature of the Beit Midrash. The question is, during election season, to come to a room filled with non-voters, is that the... Okay, we have some voters, but the truth is, oh wow, okay, now I've changed my tone. No, I'm kidding. The truth is that when I became a member of Knesset, I told myself that aside from what I can do within the Knesset in terms of legislation and trying to affect policy, I also viewed it as a platform to be able to reach out and speak and engage in conversation with so many groups that I never would have had the opportunity to speak with. And that, as I look back on the year and a half, has been, I think, the greatest thrill in being in the Knesset, is that all of a sudden, on a weekly basis, I find myself in groups that I never had the opportunity to reach out to get to understand, for them to hear me, and therefore it was natural that I would come, and regardless of the season that we're in terms of the status of the Knesset, it's an honor to be here. The question of the role that the Haredi community can play in Israel, my answer is it should play a major role in what's happening in Israel, but not the way the Haredi community is today. Meaning the way it is today, I would say we have to find a way to minimize the impact that it has, but we need to work to help bring that community to a place where it not only should have a major impact, but can really, in a very positive way, influence the state of Israel. I'm going to go back to perhaps one of my first engagements with the Haredi community in modern day Israel. Because when I look back, I went to yeshiva here many years ago, and was in a Haredi yeshiva, and I definitely had issues regards to its approach towards the state of Israel. For example, it bothered me from the first Shabbat that I was there that they didn't say the prayer for the soldiers, and it was something which I voiced and always felt a disconnect with the yeshiva because of that specific issue. And I grew up in a shul where every Shabbat we said the tefillah. Now I come to Israel, and we're not saying the tefillah, and it really bothered me to the core. I was here during the first Gulf War, and I'll never forget that we were standing and saying Tehillim in the Beit Midrash, and all of a sudden I got a tap on my shoulder, and it was my second cousin. He was in full uniform, and he had a duffel bag over his shoulder, and because we didn't know what direction it was going in at that point, he was called to the front, I think it was with Syria at the time, just to be on guard. And I remember at that moment thinking to myself that here we are, we're praying, he's going off and he's doing, and we're not praying specifically for him. And it really bothered me. But I didn't understand at that time what direction the Haredi community was going in. But when we started having issues in Beit Shemesh, that's when it really hit me. And the first episode that really sticks out in my mind, and that's actually my first act of politics in Israel, all of a sudden we woke up one morning and there were these yellow signs plastered around our neighborhood on the walls. And the signs said, I'll try to get it right in English, it said, "It is forbidden to walk on this street in clothing deemed immodest." That's what it said, these signs. And I, as a male, found the signs very offensive. I can only imagine what it felt like to a female who regularly walked the streets, and the discomfort that would make them feel. So I said to myself, okay, I was a Rebbe in a yeshiva at the time. I don't know anything about politics. I don't know anything about anyone in Beit Shemesh. How do you deal with this? But I knew how to go to a hardware store and buy spray paint. So in my first my first political act in Israel, I bought spray paint and I went out at 2 o'clock in the morning and I spray painted over the signs. And that actually worked. Meaning they kept coming back a little bit, but we kept spray painting over them, and it worked. They were bullying, we bullied back, and it worked. And I all of a sudden realized that even though I have no voice in this country in terms of a platform, but we don't have to sit and let people do this to us. We can actually do something back just to try to stop it. But as the problems got worse in Beit Shemesh, I started asking myself, how did we get here? How did we get here? How do we get to a point where people feel the freedom to just post signs like this throughout Beit Shemesh, or a few years later come to the street and actually torment young girls on their way to and from school? How do we get to this point? Because if we want to deal with it, spray painting over the signs is not going to be enough. We have to go to the core. And I'll start in analyzing this with a story that happened. It was during the election campaign, about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And I appear regularly on Haredi radio. And my wife always says, why are you doing this to yourself? All they do is beat up on you the whole time. But I know that there are a few tens of thousands of people listening. And as long as I maintain my cool and I present my side of it, there are people out there. Maybe they'll hear the call. And one night in particular was on Radio Kol Chai. It was their 8 o'clock slot where they said there's tens of thousands of people who literally, this is their moment to connect to the media in the day, to listen to the radio. And he says to me, the host says to me, how can you, as an Orthodox rabbi, who studied in yeshiva and understands the importance of learning Torah, how can you possibly suggest that guys who are learning in Kollel should leave Kollel and go to work? And I said to him, is it okay if I read a Rambam to you? And he said, okay. So I read the Rambam, I just read it in Hilchot Talmud Torah, where the Rambam says, and I read it in Hebrew, where the Rambam says, anybody who decides to learn Torah and forces other people to support him, meaning if a person is independently wealthy and this is what you want to do in your life, you're certainly welcome to do so. But to force other people to support you, which is essentially what's happening here in this country, where the assumption is that through everyone's tax shkalim, that's going to support them in learning Torah. The Rambam says that person chilel et Hashem, bizat Torah, and has no chelik in olam haba. I just read it. I didn't say no commentary. I just read it. Okay, that person who has chosen to study Torah and force others to support him has desecrated God, brought shame to Torah, and has no portion in the world to come. So there was a pause on the other side of the telephone, on the microphone, and then he says to me, listen to these words, he says to me, you're quoting Maimonides from like 1,000 years ago? How is that relevant today? So that was the moment where I realized two things. I realized that, first of all, the Haredi community has completely lost its path. The whole idea is to be based on all the classic sources, and now that's not relevant in modern times. And number two, I realized that we can actually get this done. We can actually get this done. If we stick to the sources, which from beginning to end are filled with, especially when it comes to the workforce, that we're supposed to support our families with dignity, I realize that we can do this. And this is what I do day after day. And I do it in the Knesset as well, and it drives the Haredi members of Knesset crazy. But I talk about the language in the Ketuvah, that the man has accepted upon himself to support his wife and his family. And I talk about the Mishnah, which says that any Torah without work, it's gone. The Torah's gone and it leads to sin. And I talk about the Gemara in Kedushin, which says that if a parent is obligated to teach the child a trade, and just over and over again, sources, because I have no answer to these sources. But how did it happen that in order to explain a way of life, a Haredi radio personality has to say, we no longer hold by Maimonides? Right? How do we get to this point? So it's really important when dealing with this issue and trying to understand what needs to be done today, just to understand the history of how we got here and what can be done to change it. So just going back, we know that certainly the original, I'll use this term Haredim just because there's no other term to use for this community, they came here, students of the Baal Shem Tov and students of the Vilna Gaon, who came here in the late 18th century. They were sent here on a spiritual mission to come and live in the land of Israel. And they were viewed as the representatives, as the ambassadors of world Jewry, or certainly European Jewry, to be here and live a spiritual life in Israel. And they were supported by mostly European Jewry. There was a system called the Chalukah, where people sent money so that these people could live here. They weren't sent here to start settlements. They weren't started to work agriculture. They were sent here to be spiritual, very pious. They started mostly in the north, especially in the Tzfat area, and then eventually made their way towards Yerushalayim, towards Jerusalem as well. And they were living here, living this very pious life, again, representatives of world Jewry to live here in Israel. And then, all of a sudden, secular Zionism started creeping in. And there's this mass movement of Jews from around the world coming back to Israel. For the most part, even though the original group, in terms of the Chovevei Tzion, were religious in nature, but for the most part, certainly people who became leaders here were secular in nature. And something which is important for us to confront, and I talk about this all the time when I speak to secular groups, there was a determination by people who we revere for their courage and their initiative to start the state of Israel, but they wanted a secular state. They wanted a state devoid of God, devoid of Torah, devoid of mitzvot, and sort of a new Judaism to form in this developing state. So this very spiritual community sees this coming, and they have to make a decision. How are we going to deal with this? What is our response going to be? We've been living here sort of on our own without this influence, but now these masses of Jews are coming from around the world seeking to build a very secular state. What's our response going to be? So in a really amazing story, Rav Kook and Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld was the rabbi, the leader of what they call the Yishuv HaYashan, the old settlement here in Jerusalem. They went actually on a tour together of all these secular kibbutzim. This is in the, I believe, in 1913, 1914. And they went around to try to have influence, to try to get an assessment of the situation. And they walked away from this experience with two different responses. Rav Kook walked away with a response of, wow, in one kibbutz here, we were able to convince them to have a kosher kitchen. And in one kibbutz over there, they talked about maybe doing something spiritual on Yom Kippur, and that was his perspective, focusing on the positive that could happen out of this relationship between the religious and the secular. Rav Zonnenfeld had the exact opposite response. He said, oh my gosh, the people are eating pork. They have nothing on Yom Kippur. All we can do is circle the wagons and have nothing to do with this developing state and with these wicked people, in his words, who are establishing this state. And that was the beginning of a Judaism which is foreign to all of our tradition, where they said we will have nothing at all to do with the world around us, certainly not in terms of being involved in the state, but even more than that, we are not going to get involved in any kind of education, in any kind of working. This is not a society that we will be part of in any way. Now, again, as the state developed, there was this deal between the Chazon Ish and Ben Gurion about the 400. You'll hear about this number, the 400 who are going to focus exclusively on study and not have to serve in the military. That 400 is now 55,000 between the ages of 18 and 24. And we've developed a society which doesn't view itself as part of the state. Maybe we'll play the political game here and there and try to get whatever we can from it, but they don't view themselves as part of the broader as part of the broader nation. Not in terms of nationhood in general, not in terms of studying basic general studies. And you look back again historically, our greatest rabbis always were well versed in the wisdom of the world. That was basic to who we were as a people. And especially this idea of not joining the workforce, of somehow working becoming a negative, and someone who decides to leave and go to work almost views himself as if he's a second-class citizen. Now, what has that developed? There is a direct line between that. The truth is, the question of whether I would come to this Beit Midrash to speak today is not really the question in terms of the nature of the Beit Midrash. The question is, during election season, to come to a room filled with non-voters, is that okay, we have some voters, but the truth is, oh wow, okay, now I'll change my tone. No, I'm kidding. The truth is that when I became a member of Knesset, I told myself that aside from what I can do within the Knesset, in terms of legislation and trying to affect policy, I also viewed it as a platform to be able to reach out and speak and engage in conversation with so many groups that I never would have had the opportunity to speak with. And that, as I look back on the year and a half, has been, I think, the greatest thrill in being in the Knesset, is that all of a sudden, on a weekly basis, I find myself in groups that I never had the opportunity to reach out to get to understand, for them to hear me, and therefore it was natural that I would come, and regardless of the season that we're in terms of the status of the Knesset, it's an honor to be here. The question of the role that the Haredi community can play in Israel, my answer is it should play a major role in what's happening in Israel, but not the way the Haredi community is today. Meaning the way it is today, I would say we have to find a way to minimize the impact that it has, but we need to work to help bring that community to a place where it not only should have a major impact, but can really, in a very positive way, influence the state of Israel. I'm going to go back to perhaps one of my first engagements with the Haredi community in modern day Israel. Because when I look back, I went to yeshiva here many years ago, and was in a Haredi yeshiva, and I definitely had issues regards to its approach towards the state of Israel. For example, it bothered me from the first Shabbat that I was there that they didn't say the prayer for the soldiers, and it was something which I voiced and always felt a disconnect with the yeshiva because of that specific issue. That I grew up in a shul where every Shabbat we said the tefillah. Now I come to Israel, and we're not saying the tefillah, and it really bothered me to the core. I was here during the first Gulf War, and I'll never forget that we were standing and saying Tehillim in the Beit Midrash, and all of a sudden I got a tap on my shoulder, and it was my second cousin. He was in full uniform, and he had a duffel bag over his shoulder, and because we didn't know what direction it was going in at that point, he was called to the front. I think it was with Syria at the time, just to be on guard. And I remember at that moment thinking to myself that here we are, we're praying, he's going off and he's doing, and we're not praying specifically for him. And it really bothered me. But I didn't understand at that time what direction the Haredi community was going in. But when we started having issues in Beit Shemesh, that's when it really hit me. And the first episode that really sticks out in my mind, and that's actually my first act of politics in Israel, all of a sudden we woke up one morning and there were these yellow signs plastered around our neighborhood on the walls. And the signs said, I'll try to get it right in English, it said, "It is forbidden to walk on this street in clothing deemed immodest." That's what it said, these signs. And I, as a male, found the signs very offensive. I can only imagine what it felt like to a female who regularly walked the streets, and the discomfort that would make them feel. So I said to myself, okay, I was a Rebbe in a yeshiva at the time. I don't know anything about politics. I don't know anything about anyone in Beit Shemesh. How do you deal with this? But I knew how to go to a hardware store and buy spray paint. So in my first my first political act in Israel, I bought spray paint and I went out at 2 o'clock in the morning and I spray painted over the signs. And that actually worked. Meaning they kept coming back a little bit, but we kept spray painting over them, and it worked. They were bullying, we bullied back, and it worked. And I all of a sudden realized that even though I have no voice in this country in terms of a platform, but we don't have to sit and let people do this to us. We can actually do something back just to try to stop it. But as the problems got worse in Beit Shemesh, I started asking myself, how do we get here? I mean, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where people feel the freedom to just post signs like this throughout Beit Shemesh, or a few years later come to the street and actually torment young girls on their way to and from school? How do we get to this point? Because if we want to deal with it, spray painting over the signs is not going to be enough. We have to go to the core. And I'll start in analyzing this with a story that happened. It was during the election campaign, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I appear regularly on Haredi radio. And my wife always says, "Why are you doing this to yourself? All they do is beat up on you the whole time." But I know that there are a few tens of thousands of people listening. And as long as I maintain my cool and I present my side of it, there are people out there. Maybe they'll hear the call. And one night in particular, it was on Radio Kol Chai. It was their 8 o'clock slot where they said there's tens of thousands of people who literally, this is their moment to connect to the media in the day and listen to the radio. And he says to me, the host says to me, how can you, as an Orthodox rabbi who studied in yeshiva and understands the importance of learning Torah, how can you possibly suggest that guys who are learning Kollel should leave Kollel and go to work? And I said to him, is it okay if I read a Rambam to you? And he said, okay. So I read the Rambam, I just read it in Hilchot Talmud Torah, where the Rambam says, and I read it in Hebrew, where the Rambam says, anybody who decides to learn Torah and forces other people to support him, meaning if a person is independently wealthy and this is what you want to do in your life, you're certainly welcome to do so. But to force other people to support you, which is essentially what's happening here in this country, where the assumption is that through everyone's tax shkalim, that's going to support them in learning Torah. The Rambam says that person chilel et Hashem, bizat HaTorah, and has no chelek in olam haba. I just read it. I didn't say no commentary. I just read it. Okay, that person who has chosen to study Torah and force others to support him has desecrated God, brought shame to Torah, and has no portion in the world to come. So there was a pause on the other side of the telephone, on the microphone, and then he says to me, listen to these words, he says to me, you're quoting Maimonides from like 1,000 years ago? How is that relevant today? So that was the moment where I realized two things. I realized that, first of all, the Haredi community has completely lost its path. The whole idea is to be based on all the classic sources, and now that's not relevant in modern times. And number two, I realized that we can actually get this done. We can actually get this done if we stick to the sources, which from beginning to end are filled with, especially when it comes to the workforce, that we're supposed to support our families with dignity. I realized that we can do this, and this is what I do day after day, and I do it in the Knesset as well, and it drives the Haredi members of Knesset crazy. But I talk about the language in the Ketuvah, that the man has accepted upon himself to support his wife and his family. And I talk about the Mishnah, which says that any Torah without work, it's gone. The Torah's gone and it leads to sin. And I talk about the Gemara in Kedushin, which says that if a parent is obligated to teach a child a trade, and just over and over again, sources, because they have no answer to these sources. But how did it happen that in order to explain a way of life, a Haredi radio personality has to say, we no longer hold by Maimonides? Right? How do we get to this point? So it's really important when dealing with this issue and trying to understand what needs to be done today, just to understand the history of how we got here and what can be done to change it. So just going back, we know that certainly the original, I'll use this term Haredim just because there's no other term to use for this community, they came here, students of the Baal Shem Tov and students of the Vilna Gaon, who came here in the late 18th century. They were sent here on a spiritual mission to come and live in the land of Israel, and they were viewed as the representatives, as the ambassadors of world Jewry, or certainly European Jewry, to be here and live a spiritual life in Israel. And they were supported by mostly European Jewry. There was a system called the Chalukah, where people sent money so that these people could live here. They weren't sent here to start settlements. They weren't started to work agriculture. They were sent here to be spiritual, very pious. They started mostly in the north, especially in the Tzfat area, and then eventually made their way towards Yerushalayim, towards Jerusalem as well. And they were living here, living this very pious life, again, representatives of world Jewry to live here in Israel. And then, all of a sudden, secular Zionism started creeping in. And there's this mass movement of Jews from around the world coming back to Israel. For the most part, even though the original group, in terms of the Chovevei Tzion, were religious in nature, but for the most part, certainly the people who became leaders here were secular in nature. And something which is important for us to confront, and I talk about this all the time when I speak to secular groups, there was a determination by people who we revere for their courage and their initiative to start the state of Israel, but they wanted a secular state. They wanted a state devoid of God, devoid of Torah, devoid of mitzvot, and sort of a new Judaism to form in this developing state. So this very spiritual community sees this coming, and they have to make a decision. How are we going to deal with this? What is our response going to be? We've been living here sort of on our own, without this influence, but now these masses of Jews are coming from around the world, seeking to build a very secular state. What's our response going to be? So in a really amazing story, Rav Kook and Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld was the rabbi, the leader of what they called the Yishuv HaYashan, the old settlement here in Jerusalem. They went actually on a tour together of all these secular kibbutzim. This is in I believe, in 1913, 1914. And they went around to try to have influence, to try to get an assessment of the situation. And they walked away from this experience with two different responses. Rav Kook walked away with a response of, wow, in one kibbutz here, we were able to convince them to have a kosher kitchen. And in one kibbutz over there, they talked about maybe doing something spiritual on Yom Kippur. And that was his perspective, focusing on the positive that could happen out of this relationship between the religious and the secular. Rav Sonnenfeld had the exact opposite response. He said, oh my gosh, the people are eating pork. They have nothing on Yom Kippur. All we can do is circle the wagons and have nothing to do with this developing state and with these wicked people, in his words, who are establishing this state. And that was the beginning of a Judaism which is foreign to all of our tradition, where they said we will have nothing at all to do with the world around us, certainly not in terms of being involved in the state, but even more than that, we are not going to get involved in any kind of education, in any kind of working. This is not a society that we will be part of in any way. Now, again, as the state developed, there was this deal between the Chazon Ish and Ben Gurion about the 400. You'll hear about this number, the 400 who are going to focus exclusively on study and not have to serve in the military. That 400 is now 55,000 between the ages of 18 and 24. And we've developed a society which doesn't view itself as part of the state. Maybe we'll play the political game here and there and try to get whatever we can from it, but they don't view themselves as part of the broader as part of the broader nation. Not in terms of nationhood in general, not in terms of studying basic general studies, and you look back again historically, our greatest rabbis always were well versed in the wisdom of the world that was basic to who we were as a people, and especially this idea of not joining the workforce, of somehow working becoming a negative, and someone who decides to leave and go to work almost views himself as if he's a second-class citizen. Now, what has that developed? There is a direct line between that that people want to see change. And the third reason, and it might even be the number one reason, is people don't like going around the country and feeling that people are looking at them as people who are just interested in themselves. And I'm going to avoid using various terminologies that are used, unfortunately, sometimes on the extreme secular side, but people don't want to be seen that way. They don't want to be seen as just takers. They walk around and they go on the buses and they feel that secular people or broader Israel are looking at them in that way, and people don't like that feeling. So you have these three factors: the poverty, the fact that they're losing their children, and the fact that they don't want to be seen the way they've been seen over the last few decades in Israel, all working in our favor. So the question is, so what do we do about it? What solutions can there be? So the first thing and the most important change revolves around the workforce. It revolves around people going to work, because there are very few rabbis who will stand up and say, "You're trying to get our people to work, this is horrible." They're not going to say that, because they know that all the sources and that our tradition is that we work. That's who we are. That's a value that we have as Jews, and therefore that's if you're talking about a strategy, how to approach it, that's the best place to focus on, because it's not an issue of religion and state, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It's not an issue of telling them to be less religious or in any way. We're just saying go and work. And therefore, when I got to the Knesset, I actually started a Knesset task force to help Haredim get to work. We started numerous projects, and we don't have time now to explain them all. But just to tell you, we get an average of 500 resumes a month from a Haredi community, from Haredim who want to go and work, and we help them find jobs. We've met with CEOs of major companies, and we've encouraged them to try to hire Haredim. It's not easy. It's not easy, and they're scared. What is it going to do to the dynamics in their workplace? But as it starts happening, they find something remarkable that happens. That, first of all, Haredim, for the first time, realize that broader Israel, and I'll use the term secular just for lack of a better term at the moment, what they view as secular Israel is not so bad. They're not horrible people. Yes, they live a different lifestyle, but they realize that they're value-centered people and people who they can actually get along with. This is counter to what they've been taught their entire lives about what's out there. Secular Israel, broader Israel, for the first time realizes that Haredim aren't bad people. They can be wonderful people. Many of them who have been involved in chesed and volunteering for many, many years, very caring people, and they can actually get along with one another. And all of a sudden they start inviting one another to their family happy occasions and celebrations, and all of a sudden we have a platform for an interface between the Ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi, and broader Israel. And that in and of itself is a major, major accomplishment that happens just by them going to work. Yes, they earn a paycheck for the first time in their lives, and they have a tremendous feeling of self-worth. The moment they get that first check, they described it to me. It's an unbelievable feeling. I worked hard, I got paid for it, and now I can actually buy my children food. This is a major moment, and then their friends see that, and their friends want that also. They call it chaver mivi chaver. It goes from one friend to another, and they find that, how do you get a job, how do you get a job? We put into this budget 500, the first budget that we were able to pass before we're now going to elections, 500 million shekel, 500 million shekel towards training Haredim to get jobs. That's a major change. You know, people ask in the Haredi community, they sometimes say to me, you know, how dare you take away the money that we were getting from the yeshivot and the kollels? And I say, we didn't take it away. We just shifted it in terms of priorities. It's there for you. Just use it to go find a job, and all the opportunities are in front of you. And thank God they are doing so. We've seen a 40% increase in Haredim who come to government programs to be able to find training. So thank God we're off and running in terms of that. The other issue, though, because finding the jobs now on a certain level is a band-aid. It's taking young men who don't have any kind of a training at all and trying some kind of a quick fix to get them a job. Where the change really has to happen is in education. Adina Bar Shalom, who is Rabbi Yosef of Blessed Memory's daughter, I think the first or second week we were in the Knesset, she said to me, if you want to make a real change, positive change in the Haredi community, it has to happen in education, and especially to get them basic math and English. Because what happens is, when they wake up and they want to go and work, they don't have the basic skills. They don't know multiplication. They can't read or write in English. So if you give them that at the younger ages, then when they're older and they make the decision that they want to go to work, hopefully they'll have that basis and they'll be able to do so. And we worked very hard, and feels hard to say that, Education Minister Shai Peron put into place programs that we started an actual public school network for Haredim. Until now, there was Mamlachti Chiloni, the public schools for the secular community, Mamlachti Dati for religious Zionists, and now we have, the first time in the history of Israel, Mamlachti Haredi, where we said we will give you full funding for a Haredi school if you have basic general studies. And this school year, very quietly, with no headlines, that was the deal that the Haredi side demanded, with no headlines, we opened 42 schools. 42 Haredi schools with basic general studies. And I visited some of those schools, and it's unbelievable what's happening there. It looks like the education that I had. They have in the morning they study Torah, in the afternoon they have basic general studies. They give them the opportunity to have some sports. These kids say it's the first time in their lives that within this school framework they're able to kick around a soccer ball. And they feel so good about themselves. And the Rebbeim tell me that the boys are studying better in terms of Torah. And they're praying better because they feel better about themselves, because they're not boxed into this small little track which says that all you do all day is study Torah. So all of that is happening, and we're on the right track. And like I said before, there's no doubt that once you create that framework, that will change things in terms of religion and state as well. Let me talk about religion and state for a moment. If I were to go up to the average Haredi and say to them, what is wrong in your mind with the conversion policy that was just voted on by the government as a government decision, and I'll explain why that's bad in a moment, they would say, because either they would say because the rabbi said so, or they would say because you're going to accept people with no process at all on conversion. There's no process, it's just anybody who wants to be Jewish can be Jewish. A complete lack of information, a complete lack of understanding, and also a complete lack of understanding of the sources. Because if I would go to them and say, what does a person have to do to become a Jew? They would say to me, and by the way, this is what I would answer, having in elementary school, in the Hebrew Academy of Greater Washington, a great school, but that's what I would answer based on just what I heard. I would say you have to accept all Taryag mitzvot. You have to be keeping all 613 mitzvot. That's just the assumption out there. But then you start studying sources, and you start seeing what's actually there in the Torah, and you see that's not true. And it's especially not true for a category in halacha called Zerei Yisrael, people who are from Jewish descent, especially when you talk about a few 100,000 Russians who moved to Israel and want to be Jewish and want to be living in Israel and fight for us and even die for us, and the door is closed to them if they want to convert. People, they're not aware at all. Not the lack of awareness completely in the community. It's just either some very stringent understanding of it, or it's this is what the rabbi said. That's in terms of that issue. I'll give you another issue. I woke up last week, I think it was, and saw in Yediot Achronot the story about a girl named Jennifer who said that when she went through her conversion through the rabbinate, she got to this very spiritual moment where she's actually going into the mikvah, and she first went into the mikvah without any clothing on, with the female attendant who was there, and she said she described how she felt God's presence enveloping her as she did this, and then she walked out of the mikvah in order to put on this special garment which they have, where then she's supposed to go into the mikvah with the three dayanim, three male rabbis in the room, and she's supposed to do it with this garment on. And she walks out of the mikvah to put it on, and as she's walking out of the water, again, there's a woman standing there unclothed, the rabbis walked into the room. And she said she went from the moment of her greatest spiritual high to the lowest of the low. She said, here I've gone through a process where I've been taught about the importance of modesty. And I embrace it. I embrace it as part of my life. And here at this most important moment, the lowest of the low possibly, in terms of modesty, happens. I was able to reach her by phone and spoke to her. And I decided after hearing this, and also on the heels of all kinds of controversy in America about it, what are the sources about this? What are the sources about this? And all of a sudden I find out that Rav Shmuel Salant, who was one of the rabbis of the Yeshuv HaYashan in Jerusalem, of the Old Settlement Jerusalem, and Rav Uziel, who was one of the Sephardic chief rabbis of Israel, and Rav Moshe Feinstein, who is one of the greatest halachic authorities of the 20th century, all say that in various circumstances, or if need be, there is no need for the male, any males, to be in that room at all. It's not a halacha of edut, it's not a testimony, and they can be outside the room. They can be outside the room, they don't have to be anywhere involved in this experience. So I stood up in the Knesset, and I said, I called on the Deputy Minister of Religion, and I sent him a letter. Again, I don't want to shake up the whole establishment, but that every single woman in this process should be at least offered the option, if she chooses, of going to the mikvah without any males in the room. It's based on these sources. These women describe how hard it is for them. I talked to other women about it as well. And once it's halachically sound, we have to give that option. And again, to the broader Haredi world, this is heresy. This is heresy. But what we have to do is, about all these issues, about conversion, about the mikvah process in general, when it comes to the issues of marriage, When it comes to the Agunah issue, there are sources out there that we can solve these problems if our goal is to be creative and solve the problems, and not to circle the wagons and say we will have nothing at all to do with this. When people ask me, do I think that change is possible? I do think it's possible. I don't think we're talking about a year or 2 years or 10 years. I think it's 2 generations until we get to the point where we can mirror what I experienced in America here, in terms of that it's mainstream to have general studies, that it's mainstream to get a college degree, and that it's mainstream to go to work. I think it's talking about 2 generations, but we have to start the process now. The Haredi community in Israel numbers about 800,000. That's a tenth of the Israeli population. But, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, and I want to be very clear. The birth rate in the Haredi community, and thank God Jewish children are being born in the state of Israel, it's about 7, 8 children per family, as opposed to the rest of the population, which is somewhere around 3. So as we look forward, where are we headed as a state? We need to do something about this now, both, by the way, in terms of the economics of it, that you can't have a community which becomes a higher and higher percentage of Israel that's being supported by the rest of the country. It won't work economically at some point. But I'm talking even as the value of what kind of country are we going to have. You know, we have people talking about the issues of Iran and the Palestinian conflict and the cost of living. These are all obviously important issues. But if you want to analyze what might be the greatest internal threat to the state of Israel, I really believe it's this issue. And especially after a year and a half of seeing the progress that we've made, this is the issue, because we can't tackle it in terms of religion and state head on. The numbers aren't there. There's no constellation of the government where we can get it done. Everything we want to get done. We thought in this past government that we could. There was a relationship between Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, and we thought that through that relationship, even though we disagree about the Palestinian conflict, we thought we pretty much agreed about everything else, especially religion and state. And Naftali himself might agree. He himself is pretty progressive, but his party, the Bayit Yehudi, ended up being much more extreme than we thought it would be. We got a lot done, but not enough done. But here we are on the cusp of an election. And when we talk about what is this election about, and I'm not here for a political rally, but it's important for you to understand, and especially you're going to be leaders all around the world to understand where is Israel headed. If we have a government which is formed as a result of this election, where it's essentially a right-wing government on the Palestinian issue, and then they bring in the Haredi parties, they're going to, and the Haredi parties already use this terminology, turn back the clock. That's the terminology they use on all the progress we have made in this last year and a half. You know, I sit as a member of the Yesh Atid party, and we're living in a world right now where there's a lot of criticism towards us, and I would tell you some of it's valid, some of it's based on misinformation. But if there's one thing that we have accomplished over this year and a half, is we were able to form a government without the Haredi parties, and that enabled us to move forward on all these issues. Not as far forward as we would have wanted, but baby steps for sure, and we're in the right direction. And now the goal is to just turn back the clock. And turn back the clock means goodbye to the general education, no more general education, goodbye to government funding to help them go to work, undoing the conversion policy change. It was made as a government decision, as not as a law. A government decision can be changed the very first Sunday the government meets after the elections. Undone, back to whatever it was before. progress that was made on other issues, on women's advancement, all this turned back the clock. And therefore, as much as these elections are completely unnecessary, completely a waste of 2 billion shekel, which could be used for a lot of good in Israel, and there was absolutely no reason for them to happen. Now that they're happening, there's a lot on the table. So I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish so far. I definitely see that it's possible to get it done. I know that in the Haredi community they wanted to get it done. I just heard yesterday morning on, Friday morning on Reshet Bet, a Haredi leader saying that there's a little bit of a fear in the Haredi community. They don't want to see all of that go back. They have gotten help finding work, but that voice is not necessarily so loud. And this is what's in front of us right now. But I absolutely believe that as we travel around Israel and present exactly what you just heard right now, in terms of the progress that has been made and where we can get to, and the quiet support in the Haredi community. I'll tell you a cute little anecdote. When we met with one of the highest ranking rabbis in the Haredi community about the draft law, which by the way is working, it's in effect. We got more Haredim than we expected for the first year after the law was passed to serve in the military. When we met with him, he said to us, if we are unhappy with the law, then we're going to have a massive demonstration out in the streets, and we'll be rioting, and there'll be rabbis riling up the crowd. If we're unhappy with it, we can't do nothing. So we will do a prayer rally because you're shaking up things in the community. But the prayer rally will be sort of the wink that it's okay. And that's what happened when we passed the law. There was a massive prayer rally here in Jerusalem. Nobody spoke. Nobody spoke to the crowd to get them riled up. And that was the wink. That, you know what, we did something which is okay. Even for them, they realized it was the right thing. I fully believe, because the Haredi community wants it, that if we work hard and keep our eye on the ball and focus on it, we absolutely can bring these changes. It has to be through tremendous sensitivity towards their side, not with any kind of a movement which makes them really feel like we're anti them in any kind of a personal way, but it's just trying to help change that culture. I do believe that we can create a scenario in Israel where there are Haredi, doctors and lawyers and high-tech entrepreneurs and even generals in the army. And when that happens, that will be a very positive change for Israel. Because, and this gets back to the original question, because those are not going to be people who are seeking to force their way of life on anybody, and they'll accept other people for how they are. But the secular side in Israel will finally not have a negative perception of religion and of practicing Judaism. Right now, a secular person in Israel, they don't have that much connection to people who really have this balance. All they see in front of them is something negative. Their perception of a Torah way of life, however we define that, and I make that as broad as possible, a religious way of life, to them, for the most part, it's negative because they associate it immediately with a Haredi member of Knesset standing up at the podium and calling everybody else out there Amalek and Haman. That's what they associate it with. And they associate it with the person who threw things at people in Beit Shemesh, or people who don't let women ride in the front part of the bus. That's what they associate it with. But the moment they see people who externally look very religious, but are also showing a balance, not that now they'll become Haredi, that's not the goal, but now broader Israel will be open to Judaism, to something which pushes them naturally away from any association with any movement that's religious in nature, or any study, because of the fact that it so pushes them away, and it so is not attractive to them. There's a member of our party, Ruth Calderon, who's done an amazing job in opening up the world of Torah. I sit right behind her in the plenum. She doesn't stop learning. She sits there in the plenum with her Gemara and her Mishnayot, and it's a real struggle for the Haredim to try to make sense of it. But she's showing that beautiful side where people don't necessarily feel that it's in any way forcing them or being coercive, and they can be open to the idea of studying Torah. But it has to happen on a much broader sense, and it has to come from the Haredi communities. So I do believe the Haredi community in Israel can have a massively positive influence on Israel, not in the sense of telling people they have to be Haredi, not in the sense of telling people that they have to be more religious in their lifestyle, but just showing in the massive numbers that they have that Judaism is a beautiful religion which has so much to add to their lives. And I truly hope that we can continue in the positive direction we've been going and be able to make those differences, and that all Jews living in Israel and all people can see the beauty of Judaism, and everybody in their own way will decide how much they want to make Judaism a part of their lives. I want to end my words before I take questions by applauding all of you. We need leaders all around the world, both in Israel and around the world, to inspire people to connect to their Judaism, to connect religiously. We know that we're fighting an uphill battle everywhere because there are so many forces working against it, and therefore the fact that you've taken the time and the effort and have made a decision to direct your lives in this way, it's something which I thank you for, which all the Jewish people should thank you for, and all of you should have tremendous hatzlacha, tremendous success in all that you do. And thank you so much for your time. We definitely have about, I have at least 10 to 15 minutes for questions if anybody has. We're more than happy to answer. You can remember that I went through an Israeli election campaign, and no question is too personal or challenging. So the floor is yours. Yeah.
You sound very liberal, considering what I think of as Haredi. What makes someone Haredi?
The question was, what makes someone Haredi? How in any way am I Haredi? There are 4 women, Haredi women, who went to, again, Yediot Achronot this past week, and they said that they are making a demand that the Haredi parties open the list for Knesset to women as well, and if they don't, then all the women are going to vote for other parties instead. So what was the Haredi response to that? You're not Haredi. Right? If you don't toe the line, then you're not Haredi. So they said these women don't represent Haredim, because if you represented Haredim, you wouldn't possibly be suggesting that women should, God forbid, serve on the list for Knesset. The description Haredi, if it means to not believe in working as a value, to be anti-Zionist, and to not believe that women have a place in the public sphere, then you're right, then I'm not Haredi. If Haredi means Chared Dvar Hashem, that I try as best as I can to adhere to halacha, and certainly based on the traditional understanding in terms of the Shulchan Aruch, then I'm Haredi. I never called myself Haredi. I never used those descriptions. I was always just a Jew. But here, you have to sort of give yourself that category, and especially politically, and therefore, in that sense, I would call myself Haredi, and I know that I represent tens of thousands of people who are really even more than I am in the Israeli Haredi system, who need to have this voice. So that's why I call myself that, but I don't walk around with a T-shirt saying, you know, I am Haredi. It is what it is in terms of that. Yes.
Talk a little bit about education. You also mentioned a group called Dov, who is a woman, a secular woman who studies Talmud. This obviously is a co-ed midrash for women and men both study Talmud together. You're doing a lot in education to make sure boys get more general studies. Are you doing anything here to talk about the position about women in the Haredi community being exposed more to Jewish texts?
The question was about Haredi women and exposing them more to Jewish texts. You have to, that's an issue which is very complicated, first of all, because then I'm coming in and sort of telling you on the religious side what I want you to be studying. For me to come and say to Haredi, we want you to study math and English, they can't in any way counter that with anything. It's not uprooting their whole culture. So instead of the math equation saying Bob and Jane went to the store to buy pizza, we'll say it's Moshe and Yaakov went to buy Sfarim. I mean that's what you do. You just play with the books. It's not. There's no threat to their culture. For us to come in now, at this point, and say, by the way, we also want to make changes to your Torah curriculum, that would be a civil war, and that would be it's a strategic mistake to make. That's something which is down the road that could come. And by the way, even the fact that 4 Haredi women came forward and said we're making demands in terms of the list for Knesset, that already shows the women taking an initiative. That wasn't anybody on the outside pulling them to do so. It'll come with time, but you have to let that play out by itself. The biggest mistake we can make is to come in and say, we also want to tinker somehow with your religious curriculum, and then everybody would close themselves completely to what we're trying to do. Yes?
I'm wondering if you've paid a personal price for being vocal and taking a leadership role that went against the stream of maybe your neighbors or people you sat next to in shul.
I no longer daven in the shul I davened because the rabbinic leadership made it impossible. I'll put aside, it's a smaller element. Yes, there've been the death threats and things like that, but nothing which was substantiated. Meaning, what happens is when you see something like that, you give it to the Knesset police, and they check it out, and nothing which is substantiated. And as Yair Lapid, to his credit, said when he also received a very public death threat, and he was asked on Channel 2 about it, and he said, people are not understanding the Haredi community. There is nobody in that community who is going to lift a finger against me. That's not their value, and I agree with that. I'm not afraid. I don't walk around afraid in any way of anybody doing something. Our children, we made a decision a while ago to pull them out of the Haredi school system, and they're flourishing in the various places where they study. But that was a weighty decision for us to make, and there have definitely been family strains, not in my immediate family, but especially with America, where there's so much misinformation and so much horrible lashon hara and richilut that's just spread. The only moment that for me that I would say was difficult in all of this was I was walking down the hallway in the Knesset, and a person from Radio Kol Chai, actually, from the Haredi radio, he says to me, what is your reaction to Ner Yisrael revoking your smicha? It didn't happen. It didn't happen. He said, what was your reaction? I actually stood there feeling faint. I felt my legs wobbling and I felt faint. And I went right to my office and sat down and tried to figure out what happened. That didn't happen. The Rosh Yeshiva of Ner Yisrael, who wasn't the Rosh Yeshiva when I was there, he's never met me before, the only contact we've had is a glowing recommendation that he wrote for the back of one of my books. He got up, he heard that I said that we have to close all yeshivot in Israel. And without checking into it, he stood up and in front of the whole yeshiva labeled me as some pretty horrible things. I wrote an email to him saying, "Hi, Shalom Aleichem, my name is Dov Lipman, we've never met. If you knew me, you'd never believe that story." I told him more about it, and he changed me from being a wicked apostate to an unintentional sinner. But that was a very hard period of time because that was my yeshiva, those were people who know me. I had a lot of friends sending me messages, what happened to you, how did this happen? And that was, on a personal level, was a very difficult time. But other than that, I've learned to deal with the criticism. It's daily, I don't even bother reading. I'm trying to convince my mother not to read my Facebook page and the talkbacks and articles. But there's been no real personal price. The truth is, I'd say the opposite. It's been so rewarding to have Haredim to say thank you. Thank you for helping me find a job. Thank you for giving my child general studies. Thank you for being a voice to help us leave this cycle of poverty. So it's been very rewarding in that sense. And people ask me about the elections, and obviously I'd like to continue as a member of Knesset. If not, I have no doubt that there'll be many opportunities for me. I'm not concerned about that. My greatest sadness about this whole election thing is the possibility of all that good being undone. That's really, I think about it. Last night the Prime Minister went for a last gasp attempt to Victor Lieberman, where he's sitting Shiva, for his mother who passed away last week, to try to convince him to form because the Prime Minister is suffering tremendously in the polls, to try to convince him to not go to elections and just bring the Haredim in now, and they'll have a narrow 61-seat coalition. And Lieberman said no. But when I heard about that he was going there, that's my fear. My fear is turning back the clock. That here we have all this progress happening, and that all that be undone. So I get tremendous sustenance with all the negative from the fact that we've been able to do so much good. Yes?
How do you think the job market needs to shift to absorb tens, if not hundreds of thousands of new workers? And how do you think the economics of the Haredi world will change if that were to happen?
So the first thing is, in terms of how the job market in general, one of the areas where Haredim have shown that they excel is in high tech. They can learn pretty quickly, and there are leaders in the high tech world who say that because they've been studying for so many years, and especially in Talmud, which is sort of creative thinking and logical thinking, they're actually able to bring a certain ingenuity to high tech when they take it seriously and really bring it to another realm. So we don't view it as something which is taking away any kind of jobs from anybody else. It's just that as the industry increases, there's no doubt that they can play a role there. What we want to try to do, though, is try to find areas where the Israeli job market has not been filled with Israelis necessarily. And just as an example, I know that my great-grandfather in Czechoslovakia, he was a roofer. Okay, we have a picture of him. He has the full garb, the long beard, and he was a roofer. And the idea of getting back to certain jobs, which unfortunately in Israel are viewed as menial in nature in terms of construction and the like, and try to bring them in. And yes, pay a price for it economically. Meaning don't make it something where I'm just trying to find the cheapest way to do it. I think that's something we're also, as we hopefully, again, that's all been paused right now, but as we hopefully have a boom in terms of more construction in Israel, we had plans in the works for tens of thousands of units. There have to be people to build those. So our idea was sort of to move them in that direction as well. So there are all kinds of creative things that can be done to bring them into the job market and not in any way impact the rest of the Israeli job market. In terms of the Haredi internally, it's going to be a different world. I mean, once people are going out and working, and by the way, not demanding any kind of a major change in their lifestyle. They're not looking for, okay, now I want to have my villa, now I want to have my beautiful duplex. They're a culture which is willing to live with less. You know, when we went, unfortunately, when we went to the Shivas in Harnof a few weeks ago, and I actually brought a group of young secular Yesh Atid activists with me to go meet with these families. Aside from just being inspired by the people and their belief in God, and just it's a very different world to them than they've ever seen before, they also couldn't believe the apartments. And they don't live in poverty. In almost all these cases, they worked and they have nice apartments. But to them, it was like a way of living. They're able to deal with less, and therefore, I think that'll continue that way. But they'll be able to use their money to buy their children food and buy their children clothing, and give their children all the things that everyone else wants to give their children. That's the shift that will happen, and I think that's a very positive shift in nature. You also won't see the masses going overseas when it comes time for the child's wedding to raise money for the wedding, but they'll, on their own, have their own family economics and raise money in the same way. My oldest son right now is turning 18, and my wife and I are thinking to ourselves, okay, at some point this time will come. What's the right way to prepare for that? And that's what they'll do as well. And that's certainly the shift that we hope to see take place. Yes.
I appreciate so much hearing about the ways under the radar that your party has made positive change. And I'm just wondering if maybe your focus and your push for army conscription for Haredi was maybe counterproductive to making all these other changes go even farther, because it was such a flashpoint issue and it's so much negativity came out of that on both sides, like vehement negativity came out of it. So I'm wondering next time around, if Yesh Atid is back in the government, maybe that would take a back burner, maybe that would be a future issue that you would deal with, but first get people into the workforce and change education and deal with this flashpoint issue much later.
When we were dealing with that law, and even when it was one of our flag campaign promises, many people said it's a mistake, you should be focusing on the workforce. That's what they said. What people don't realize is that as part of the draft law, a major focus of the draft law was the workforce. One of the principles of the law says that anybody who's gone through the Haredi system and is 22 years old and over does not have to serve. In the past, as long as they were in army age, which is about till 30, it was illegal for them to go to work. So you had all these men who were just sticking around in Kollel or the like, or working without reporting it, but it was illegal to hire them because they were not allowed to go to work. We said essentially they have amnesty. 22 and over, go work. And it's about 30,000 people that are receiving letters saying that they can go work, and that's a big part of these resumes that we're getting are from these people who got letters from the government saying they're free to go to work. So we did have that balance there. We felt, and again, I can definitely hear the other side of the argument. We felt that there's a core value that we're working for, which is that we're one nation. You talk about nationhood. We're one nation. We're one people. Everyone should be in it together. But the law has to be done with great sensitivity. And the law doesn't say that we're drafting every Haredi at the age of 18. The law passed already. That's not happening. The law doesn't say that any military police are going into the yeshivot to arrest anybody. That's not happening. The law said that there are goals per year. And as long as those goals are met, we're in the right direction. The goal for the first year was 2,000 Army, 1,500 National Service, out of 55,000. We met with one rabbi who told us that out of all the guys that are in yeshiva and kollel, 60% don't belong there past a few years. Which makes sense. After a few years, again, the years of 18, 19, listen, my son who's going to serve in the army, God willing, is also taking a year or two to study in yeshiva first before he goes and serve. That value is in place. It's protected by the law. But at a certain point, make the decision. Is this really your pursuit? You're one of those individuals who's able to study day and night. And again, by the way, this is important for you to know. The category is called Torato Umnato. That Torah is their profession. There are medieval commentaries, Rishonim, who say that somebody who's Torato Umnato doesn't even have to stop in the morning to pray and put on tefillin, because they're studying Torah as that's what we're talking about. People who this is their only pursuit. It's a handful in every generation who are able to do that the rest of them should serve. The noise about the draft law, we knew. And Yair Lapid talked about this. We knew that there'd be a big noise about it and very anti it, and then it would go away, and it's gone away. It's gone away. And the system is working. We exceeded our goals for the first year, and we have no doubt that we'll exceed the goals the second year, again, unless they find a way in a new government to undo the law, in which case we're sort of back to where we started again. And that would be very negative, first and foremost, for the Haredi community. First and foremost, we opened up new battalions for them in the Nachal Haredi, which is a Haredi battalion. There's a program called Shachar Kachol in the Air Force, which gives them training in electronics and computers, in engineering. They serve for 3 years in the Air Force with that, and then they have a trade afterwards. We opened up the first in the history of Israel Haredi Hesder Yeshiva, where they study, the first 2 years, they study morning and afternoon Torah, and at nighttime they're taught computers. And then the second 2 years, they wake up every morning in yeshiva, and they go and they work in the army, in intelligence and in computers, and come back to yeshiva at night for night seder. And as far as their family is concerned, they're in yeshiva. The family doesn't have to say, my son's in the army. They never go home in uniform, but they're serving the country. And it's recognized by the Defense Ministry. That took a lot of work and effort that we made happen. So there's so much positive that looking back, I don't think it was a mistake. I understand the argument the other way. We knew there would be a lot of noise at the time, and now we're off and running, and it's being successful. So I don't see that as a mistake in hindsight. Yes?
Can you talk about if there's a member of Knesset or a movement that's sort of trying to do what you're doing from the religious to the center, from the secular to the center, trying to make general Israel more aware of the Haredi world and not have blinders on their side?
It's certainly something which I try to do when I speak to the secular crowds and audiences. I wouldn't say there's education about the Haredi community. What we did put into the education system, and a lot of people on the religious side ask me this, you're talking about general studies for the Haredi, what about Judaic studies for the secular community? We have something which is called the Jewish Identity Initiative. And there are 250,000 secular schools that currently, students, in the secular schools that have those programs. And it's you have to be very careful. The secular community is so nervous about kfiyah datit, about religious coercion. It's so sensitive because of the culture that's been created creative here, and because of the fact that it's a Jewish state and what's going to happen if the religious take over the government and they'll start forcing us through laws, it's very sensitive. It's a Jewish identity initiative, and the money has been sent to that. It is running. Where they're told some basic things about Judaism, why we're here, why we're in Israel, and about some of the traditions. And we have a long way to go. There's been a lot of damage over the years done. It used to be that secular Israel, certainly I have a great uncle, for example, who knows Tanakh better than I do. And that's from school here in Israel. He's secular in his lifestyle, but he knows it better than I do. And that's been uprooted over the years, and there are various governments that are responsible for that, where there was an actual agenda to get rid of any Judaism from the secular schools. So we have to find this balance, to find a way to bring it in without in any way being religious coercion. And it's a very sensitive issue. I think that Shai Perron in general was amazing at this, of finding that balance of how do we speak to one another and how do we understand. We do have, I should say, we do have groups where Haredim and secular get together and speak, and there's various organizations like Gesher and others which work on it, but it's not happening enough. And again, there's a lot of fear on the secular side to even expose themselves to that, because their immediate assumption is that it's going to be coercive in nature. So hopefully over time we'll get more and more of that done. As more and more Haredim are in colleges, that'll also make a difference as well. Yes?
So we've been talking a lot about personal status and issues of conversion. And I'm wondering, in speaking of Klal Yisrael, there are folks who've had their conversion in other countries, United States, whatever, in non-Orthodox settings, and come to Israel and aren't in many instances recognized as Jews. So I'm just wondering if you could address that in whatever way.
Sure. The issue of everything related to the non-Orthodox streams is a very complicated one in Israel, and that's for a number of reasons. The first reason is very political in nature, and that is there's no massive body of voters that have made this an issue in Israel. Politicians in Israel react to what the voters are saying, and if there was some kind of a massive uprising about this issue, which there isn't, then it would be much more on the political agenda. That's without getting into the why, it's just the reality. Most secular Israelis sort of see it as black and white. Either there's religious, which is what they see as Orthodox, or the secular, and they want to have their secular rights. They're not looking for other kind of religious rights. Having said that, the more that we explain it, and the more that we talk about it, the more, even if it's not a politically political issue, it does pull on people's hearts and minds, and they say to themselves, wait a minute, why should funding go to only one stream and not to others? And why, if there's people who want to practice differently, shouldn't they be allowed to do so? And that discussion you do here. I mean, Yair Lapid, just as an example, as finance minister, he was able to find a way to get money to go, which hasn't happened before, towards other streams in Israel. When it comes to the religious issues, okay, I'll use a classic example. Let's use marriage. Just that's the big issue. So most people, I look around the Knesset, don't get it at all. Meaning they want to see civil marriage or some kind of a form of that, but the idea of a need to enact legislation for other forms of religious marriage, people don't see it. It's not on the radar screen. Just as an example, we in Yesh Atid, and again, we couldn't get it done politically because of Bayit Yehudi, but we worked on this issue, and we came up with our framework of civil unions. Not civil marriage, but civil unions. And the idea is that there's going to be two tracks in Israel. One is the marriage track. If you want to marry, it's going to be through the Rabbanut, hopefully a Rabbanut which will be much more open and embracing in nature, that's the marriage track. But if you don't want to follow that track, you as your civil right, living in Israel, democratic right, is that you're not forced into that track. You shouldn't have to travel to Cyprus, as thousands do, to get a civil marriage. You should have something here which gives you that right. And then we came up with civil unions, which is basically a civil contract, gives you all the rights as a married couple, but it's just a contract. We actually worked very hard on the language of the contract, and there are certain halachic issues which came up there. We were able to find all the nuances, and that was our idea. By the way, even for the Orthodox side, this makes complete and total sense. It makes no sense to take secular people who are completely secular, and force them to get married in religious marriage, because you're actually creating the worst possible halachic problem. Because what happens? They got married under a chuppah according to all the halachic requirements, with all the ramifications, which include that the woman is an Eshet Ish, right? They're bound to one another. This couple, if at some point, and unfortunately the percentages are way too high, separate from each other, they don't bother going to the Rabbanut to get a divorce, because who wants that hassle? They meet other people, start living together with other people, and have children with those other people. And now, when you talk about from the Orthodox side, you've now created mamzerut. You've created the worst possible outcome by forcing people to get married religiously. By the way, I brought this up with someone in Shas, in the Knesset. He told me something which will blow your minds. He told me, yeah, we're aware of that problem. Rabbi Yosef told us that if we're being Misader Kiddushin, if we're running a wedding ceremony, and we assess, by looking at the people, looking at the crowd, that these are people who will not keep to any level of halacha, and the scenario that I just told you will play itself out, Rabbi Yosef told them to use invalid witnesses under the chuppah so that they're not married. In other words, Rabbi Yosef instituted civil marriage in Israel. That's what he did by saying that. So, from our side, it makes sense to create another track where people who are not interested at all don't have to get married religiously. That law does nothing in terms of the issue of reform and conservative. People who don't want to have a civil union, people who want to have a religious, spiritual-based ceremony, but don't want it to be in the Orthodox fashion. So I've met with leaders of the reform and conservative communities, rabbis from America who come here in various delegations, and I told them the truth. The only way we could ever even talk about getting that done is if they agree to one condition. Let me see if anybody in this room might, what would be the one condition that I would say that the only way I could get it done politically, to let it be whatever rabbi they want, whatever ceremony they want, but one thing has to be done. Anybody know? The witnesses, the official witnesses for that marriage, would have to be witnesses. They don't have to be under the chuppah, right? They could be off camera, you can do whatever you want, but they would have to be witnesses that the Orthodox side would agree to as valid witnesses. And I said to them, you know what? Maybe that's part of Am Yisrael trying to work together as well. Meaning, I'm willing to put myself out there, and if you think I've been attacked until now, it'll be far, far worse. But I'm willing to do so because I think it's the right thing. But in order to be able to argue that there will still be a unified registry, so to speak, of those who are married halachically, that's the part that would have to be there. Some of the rabbis have accepted it and said this is beautiful, that someone's even willing to talk to us and work on a compromise. Some of them said this is horrible, we want everything. And hopefully, leadership does require compromise sometimes and understanding and meeting halfway. There is no chance it'll ever get done politically in Israel if that compromise is not agreed to. So it's not that the numbers aren't there. It's just not going to happen. But if they agree to that, I'm willing to fight for it politically, and in the right constellation, it's possible for it to get done. Okay, last question. The question was it difficult for me, or did I struggle with joining with Yesh Atid, given Yair Lapid's perspective regarding gay marriage? The answer is no, but that's only after I had a conversation with him about it. Meaning, Yair never said to me, we talked about all the issues before I joined on the Yesh Atid. We had a very open conversation about many issues, and he said straight out that on any issue of religion and state, he wants the religious members of the party to have their voice heard. And that's Shai Peron was number 2 in the party. I'm there. Elisa Levi is there. We also have another woman who is not known out there, but Penina Tamnishata, the first Ethiopian female member of Knesset, is also Shomer Shabbat, and also very, very traditional in her perspective about a lot of these issues. We actually, counter to what might be out there in the press, where Yair Lapid is viewed as this dictator who tells us what to do. It's so bothersome to me because it's so the exact opposite. We sit around at a table, and we actually have special sessions sometimes on Fridays, but every Monday at 2:30, and we talk about the issues. And everybody's voices are heard, and we take it all into account, and we make a collective decision. And no issue of religion and state is decided on, and we work on it until we find that level of agreement. So, if you'll notice, we never said anything about gay marriage. What we said was that there can be 2 tracks. One track is marriage, and one track is the civil union. The civil union side expresses people's rights as members of citizens of a country to have their rights. And therefore, for me, I'm not saying that I'm condoning it from a religious perspective, but I'm also saying that people have the right to live their lives in a democratic country as they choose. And even though I believe that according to the Torah, certain behavior is prohibited, it doesn't say, and also make their lives miserable and don't give them their civil rights. It doesn't say that. So I can raise my family according to those values, and I'll speak openly anywhere about my belief in those values, but I'm also not going to judge anybody for living their lives in a different way. And that's sort of the balance that we found. And Yair is very open to that and very against an aggressive secular agenda which puts religious people in a corner and doesn't enable them to embrace that. So that's why I was able to sign on with pride in Yesh Atid, and I continue to wear that badge with pride. I thank everyone for your time. I will leave business cards. The reason why I do that is because I don't want the conversation to end. I want the conversation to continue. So if you have any questions or criticisms or ideas, whether through Facebook or through email, we actually answer them. So you can absolutely be in touch. And again, best of luck to all of you. Thank you.